Hey everyone, this is James from Brewing Books. A belated Happy Tolkien Reading Day. Yes, March 25th marks the destruction of the One Ring and has become the official day for all things Tolkien, especially reading. Admittedly, my timing is a bit off, but better late than never. With that being said, let's dive into some Tolkien reading of our own, shall we? So, welcome to this fourth video in a series of videos where we are reading together, chapter by chapter, the Silmarillion. Now, it's been a while since I've made one of these videos, but hopefully you've been rereading the previous chapters or continuing on the quest bit by bit on your own. Still, we're here to tackle now chapters 7, 8, and 9. And so far, we've learned about the great journey that the elves have undertaken to travel from the western shores of Beleriand across the Great Sea into Aman, the land of the Valar. Now, we have been introduced to FëANOR, the greatest of the elves, specifically from the Noldor faction, which, as we have seen, is one of the three main groups of elves. And we've also seen how Melkor, the fallen Valar, has just been freed from captivity from the prison of the Valar after serving 3 ages in order to atone for his evil deeds. So let's get started. As always, keep those comments flowing and the discussion ongoing. Share your thoughts and opinions with all of us as we go along with these chapters. So let's start with chapter 7. And chapter 7 is entitled Of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. And this is how it begins. In that time were made those things that afterwards were most renowned of all the works of the elves. For FëANOR, being come to his full might, was filled with a new thought, or it may be that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near. And he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore, and his power, and his subtle skill. And at the end of all, he made the Silmarils. So, free from captivity, Melkor now wanders the land of Aman, specifically the city of Valinor, amongst the elves and the Ainur. And in fact, his contributions of hidden knowledge help the Noldor to increase their skill and craft. And for a time, Valinor is made even more beautiful. But Melkor's apparent fair appearance and reformed character conceal an evil lust towards the jewels of the Noldor, and of course a hatred towards everyone around him. And eventually, by his guile and deceit, Melkor begins to spread lies and rumors of fear and distrust amongst the elves themselves, and slowly forcing them to doubt the credibility and benevolence of the Valar. Now, the Noldor are the most affected by his lies, and although never trusting the fair appearance of Melkor, FëANOR's own character and personality further isolates him from the Valar. And it is in fact during this time of concealed danger that FëANOR creates the 3 most beautiful and perfect jewels to ever exist, the Silmarils. So, capturing the light from the 2 trees of Valinor, the elf manages to contain this light within 3 skillfully crafted gems, and fashioning them in such a way that they dispel light into a brilliance of colors. Now, the Silmarils eventually become the praise of all the inhabitants of Aman, but FëANOR, distrusting everyone around him, just like Melkor, is wary of showing them out in the open, and so he keeps them safely locked away, or he wears them around his neck. Unsurprisingly, Melkor becomes aware of the Silmarils and lusts for them even more intensely. Now, partly because of the pride of FëANOR and the lies of Melkor, at one point FëANOR threatens his half-brother Fingolfin in the city of Valinor, which is a serious offense in the eyes of the Valar, and therefore they exile FëANOR and his sons, not to return to the city until 12 years have passed, which, to be fair, in the life of an elf is pretty much nothing. And so FëANOR travels north of Aman and establishes a dwelling in what is called Formenos. Meanwhile, the Valar suspect and finally discover where all these lies and deceit are coming from: Melkor. But before they can lay their hands on him, Melkor escapes. He escapes from Aman and for a while remains hidden. And with that foreboding news, we begin the next chapter, chapter 8, of the Darkening of Valinor. When Manwë heard of the ways that Melkor had taken, it seemed plain to him that he purposed to escape to his old strongholds in the north of Middle-earth. And Orome and Tulkas went with all speed northward, seeking to overtake him if they might. But they found no trace or rumour of him beyond the shores of the Teleri, in the unpeopled wastes that drew near to the ice. Thereafter, the watch was redoubled along the northern fences of Aman. So after the ousting of Melkor, the peace and bliss in Aman return, and so a festival among elves, Maiar and Valar is organized, and takes place during the gathering of the fruits from the two trees. So as the celebrations take place, Melkor re-emerges from the shadows, and travels to the southern parts of the land of Aman. There, in a never-ending gloom, lives the creature Ungoliant, who had once served Melkor before the creation of the world. Eventually, she descended into Arda and became her own master. Now, Ungoliant takes the visible form of a gigantic spider, always hungering for light, and therefore Melkor offers her an alliance by promising her the light of the two trees, the most powerful source of light in the world. Now, FëANOR, having accepted the invitation of the Valar to come to the celebrations of the Gathering of the Fruit, attends the event without the Silmarils, which he has left locked in his dwelling in Formenos. Silly, silly FëANOR. And of course, during the feast itself, Melkor directs Ungoliant to the two trees themselves, which, for some reason, have been left unguarded, while everyone else is celebrating in the city of Valinor. So Melkor thrusts his spear into the barks of the two trees, which allows Ungoliant to suck the light out of them. She poisons their bark and lets them rot. In this attack, we are also told that the wells of Valinor are drunk dry by the insatiable hunger of the spider. And so Valinor plunges into a dreadful gloom of shadow with the destruction of the two trees, as the elves and the Valar realize only too late their mistake. Now, Melkor, making his swift escape, has achieved another devastating victory and left the world in shadow once again. And so what happens in this chapter is the pivotal moment that shifts gears in the narrative and causes the story of the Quenta Silmarillion to tumble towards its devastating conclusion. But first, let's see what other events are taking place in the next chapter. Chapter 9, by the title of The Flight of the Noldor. After a time, a great concourse gathered about the Ring of Doom, and the Valar sat in shadow, for it was night. But the stars of Varda now glimmered overhead, and the air was clear, for the winds of Manwë had driven away the vapours of death and rolled back the shadows of the sea. Then Yavanna arose and stood upon Ezel-Lohar, the green mound, but it was bare now and black, and she laid her hands upon the trees. But they were dead and dark, and each branch that she touched broke and fell lifeless at her feet. Then many voices were lifted in lamentation, and it seemed to those that mourned that they had drained to the dregs the cup of woe that Melkor had filled for them. But it was not so. So we have seen Melkor wreaking havoc in Valinor, not just in Valinor, but causing this ripple effect throughout the whole world, ultimately, by robbing them of the light of the two trees, the light of life. So as the Valar convene for council, they mourn the staggering loss that they have suffered and ultimately decide on what to do next. Of course, now the light of the two trees only lives in the three Silmarils, which were fashioned by FëANOR. And so voices are raised in the hope that FëANOR is willing to hand over the jewels in order to be unlocked and give new life to the trees. FëANOR, being the stubborn and angry elf that he is, has absolutely no intention of destroying his most prized possessions. And his mood takes a turn for the worst when he goes back home to discover his father, Finwë, having been slain by Melkor, and the Silmarils stolen. His already volatile character spurs him to drastic measures that will reshape the entire narrative and atmosphere of the Silmarillion, among which is the Oath of FëANOR, that brings vengeance and destruction upon all who swear by it. Meanwhile, Melkor, who from now on it's important to note that he will be referred to only as Morgoth, the Black Enemy, as he was cursed by FëANOR after discovering his dead father and his Silmarils stolen. And Morgoth, Melkor, has fled back to the lands of Beleriand in the east, unable to get rid of Ungoliant at his side. The spider, who has now grown to a colossal size due to her consuming all the light in Aman, hungers for further gems and sources of light. And of course, she eyes the Silmarils in the hands of Morgoth with certain lust. Of course, Morgoth refuses, and he ends up being bound by the shadowy webs of the spider, and through great pain, Morgoth cries a loud cry of torment that echoes throughout the entire lands. And his cries also reach the ears of his servants in Angband, his old fortress in the north of Beleriand. And so Morgoth's Balrogs come swiftly to their master's rescue, forcing Ungoliant to escape further inland, where she eventually makes a dwelling for herself and her offspring, along the southern mountains of Dorthonion, just north of the kingdom of Doriath, where we had seen in previous chapters the union between Melian the Maya and Thingol the Elf. And Morgoth, having freed himself from the webs of the spider, retreats back to his fortress of Angband, claiming the Silmarils. Meanwhile, over the Great Sea in the land of Aman, FëANOR is stirring up the Noldor in defiance of the Valar, and he urges his people to follow him back to Middle-earth and reclaim the Silmarils. He voices his anger against the Valar, and after swearing this dangerous oath of vengeance, a large contingent of Noldorin elves prepares to depart the Undying Lands and wage war against Morgoth. Now, Fingolfin, half-brother to FëANOR, opposes the rebellion and is completely against it, but his sense of devotion to his people forbids him from abandoning them. Therefore, he departs with a secondary and larger group of Noldorin elves behind FëANOR and his sons. Now their long march leads them out of the valley of the city of Valinor and northwards along the Pelori Mountains and the shores of the Great Sea. The Valar send them several warnings that they will no longer fall under their protection should they travel beyond Aman, and therefore exiling themselves. Now their journey is uncertain, as we've seen in the geography of the entire world of Arda. We have on the west the lands of Aman, and to the east the lands of Beleriand, and between them, dividing these two massive continents, is the Great Sea. So how can FëANOR and his people travel back towards the east, the lands of Beleriand? One way is to travel far into the north of the land of Aman, where both continents are connected by a very small stretch of frozen land, known as the Helcaraxe, or grinding ice. So FëANOR instead decides to take a different route. He heads towards the haven of Alqualonde, which is the seat of the king of the Teleri, one of the three groups of the elves, and who are renowned as the finest shipbuilders in the world. And FëANOR goes there to ask for the aid of the Teleri to provide them with ships to be used as transport across the Great Sea. Obviously, the Teleri are unwilling to go against the Valar, and therefore they refuse their request to help the Noldor, which forces the Noldor to attack their own kin. In a terrible battle which sees both sides of the Elvish factions lose many of their own people, the Noldor, through their more advanced craftsmanship in weaponry, emerge victorious. Now, this is an event known as the Kin Slang, the first Kin Slang of elf against elf, and it is another major turning point in the story of the Silmarillion. And this killing of elf by elf is the worst deed to be carried out by the children of Ilúvatar. And being victorious, the Noldor seize the ships of the Teleri and sail towards the coasts of Beleriand and Middle-earth. However, FëANOR, being FëANOR, leads only his own followers across the Great Sea and abandons his half-brother Fingolfin and the rest of the Noldor travelling on this great journey to fend for themselves. And therefore Fingolfin, still willing to follow his half-brother, decides to lead his people by braving the passage of the Helcaraxe into Beleriand and Middle-earth. And that's done. That was quite something, wasn't it? So make sure to come back to this channel in the next few days as we tackle the next 3 chapters in the Silmarillion. Hopefully the videos won't take as long as they did before, but you never know. Anyway, keep reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.